Hello, everyone. This is Rabbi Yitzchak Rudomin, and I would just like to make a brief announcement for those of you who are watching in real time or as close to real time. For the next approximately 3 weeks, it is Passover time, and I will not be able to record the lectures. So we'll be taking a break, and just wanted to let those people who are watching in real time or close to real time know that the reason for the break is because of the present Passover holidays that are taking place. And we will hopefully resume 3 weeks' time. But for those not affected by this, who'll be watching it in the future, it really makes no difference, and we will continue the series accordingly. So today we are continuing with chapter 18 of Genesis. Genesis in Hebrew is Bereshit or Bereshis, and 18 is Yud Chet. Yud is 10, Chet is the letter for 8, so 10 plus 8 is 18. Also, sometimes the letters are turned around and it becomes Chai, life. So this is a good sign. We're up to chapter 18, Chai or Yud Ches for life. And just one or two words about a couple of general subjects that will be applicable to this chapter. One of them, again, I would like to repeat, is the attributes of the forefathers. Now that we're dealing with Abraham, he's already been now renamed from Abram to Abraham. That's what we saw in chapter 17, that he performs acts of chesed. We'll see in this week's, I keep saying this week's, in today's chapter reading, how he welcomes guests into his tent. And we know from prior studies, we've seen this in previous chapters that we've read and studied, how Abraham went out of his way to convince people to follow in the way of God. So Abraham is taken to be the embodiment of the attribute of chesed, midah of chesed, attribute of chesed. Chesed means loving kindness, and Avram is the foundation of that. Some give it different names, but that's the way I've been taught to define Abraham. Abraham is the Amud HaChesed, the pillar, the foundation of Chesed, so to speak. I mean, not in the literal sense, but so to speak, as if God has embodied that attribute of Chesed, of loving kindness, of righteousness in Abraham. And then Isaac, Yitzchak, Avram's son, will be the embodiment of din, of justice. Some call it gevura, justice, in the sense that God has two names. God has two main attributes. He has a name of Yud Hey Vav Hey, which is pronounced Adonai, but we don't pronounce the name Yud Hey Vav Hey. Some pronounce it Jehovah or Yahweh, but we don't use that. Jews don't use that pronunciation. That is the name for the midah, for the attribute of chesed, loving kindness. And then there is the attribute of God as Elohim, God the judge. So that's God's attribute of justice. God sitting as a judge and judging things, and also issuing punishment. So it's mercifulness and justice, judgment. And Yaakov is the embodiment of a combination of the two. And what do you get when you combine, you balance out, rather, let's say, mercifulness and justice? you arrive at the truth. Emet. Titen emet liYaakov. Jacob is defined by the attribute of truth. So this week, today, we'll be seeing Abraham as the attribute of chesed. And then there is the subject of angels. We'll be introduced to that. This is a difficult concept, especially for modern man. Who believes in angels? But in classical Judaism, in Torah Judaism, and in the Midrashic, and even in the Torah, not just the Midrashic literature, we see in the Torah, there are such creatures called angels. Now, what's an angel? An angel basically is an automaton, just basically a spiritual robot that serves God. That God, just as we don't see God, right? We don't see God. Jews worship an invisible God. God has no bodily form. There's no matter. There's no physical dimension to God. But just as God is totally invisible, yet, he runs the world, he also has emissaries that are invisible, and they help him in certain missions. Some of them have names: Gabriel, Michael, Raphael, and there are other names for them. Those are good angels. Then there's a bad angel, Samael, and so on and so forth. And there's different types of angels: Ophanim, Srafim, Malachim, different forms of angels. These are celestial beings, spiritual creatures that remain invisible, but that do carry out God's will. That's basically how we understand malach, an angel. It's not melech. Melech is a king. It's not melach. Melach is salt. So don't get confused with these words. Malach is an angel. Melech is a king. And melach is salt. I don't know if there's a connection between those things, but that's what we call angels in Hebrew, malachim. And every now and again, they do take on a human form. They take on or a form that appears to be human or physical when they come down to do a mission, as we'll see in the chapter we're about to read. So those are the important points I wanted to touch on before we get into the actual chapter. Now, it turns out there's a lot of commentary on this chapter, and it's difficult really to choose which points to bring out, but I will try. We'll try to focus on a couple of points after we read the chapter. Now, as I usually do, I'm going to read the chapter from the Aryeh Kaplan translation, and of course there will be a link at the bottom in the information box to the Aryeh Kaplan translation. I'll put it in once I complete recording the video, and you can, if you're reading later, listening to this later, you can on your own click on the link to the Living Torah, and you can read along and see the Aryeh Kaplan translation with the notes. There's actually very nice notes from Aryeh Kaplan that are all provided on that link. And I also provide a link to a Hebrew-English translation by the Mechon Mamre organization. And I also provide a link to a Hebrew-English translation of the Rashi commentary. It's not linear. It's just paragraph by paragraph. But you can figure it out if you're interested in deepening your study of the Rashi commentary. Okay, so now let's proceed to read the chapter. So here goes. And it's also the beginning of a new Torah portion. As I mentioned, from chapter 1 to chapter 17, we've covered 3 Torah portions: Parshiot, Breshit, Noach, and Lech Lecha. And now with chapter 18, we are starting the Torah portion of Vayera. That's taken from the first word in this verse, Vayera Elav, and he appeared unto him. Okay, but Aryeh Kaplan goes as follows. About the visitors, God appeared to Abraham in the plains of Mamre while he was sitting at the entrance of the tent in the hottest part of the day. Abram lifted his eyes and he saw three strangers standing a short distance from him. When he saw them from the entrance of his tent, he ran to greet them, bowing down to the ground. He said, Sir, if you would, do not go on without stopping by me. Let some water be brought and wash your feet. Rest under the tree. I will get a morsel of bread for you to refresh yourselves. Then you can continue on your way. After all, you are passing by my house. All right, they replied, do as you say. Abram rushed to Sarah's tent and said, Hurry, 3 measures of the finest flour. Knead it and make rolls. Abraham ran to the cattle and chose a tender, choice calf. He gave it to a young man who rushed to prepare it. Abraham fetched some cottage cheese and milk, and the calf he prepared, and he placed it before his guests. He stood over them as they ate under the tree. They asked him, Where is your wife Sarah? Here in the tent, he replied. I will return to you this time next year, said one of the men, and your wife Sarah will have a son. Sarah was listening behind the entrance of the tent, and he was on the other side. Abram and Sarah were already old, well on in years, and Sarah no longer had female periods. She laughed to herself, saying, Now that I am worn out, shall I have my heart's desire? My husband is old. God said to Abraham, Why did Sarah laugh and say, Can I really have a child when I am so old? Is anything too difficult for God? At the designated time, I will return, and Sarah will have a son. Sarah was afraid, and she denied it. I did not laugh, she said. Abram said, You did laugh. The strangers got up from their places and gazed at Sodom. Abraham went with them to send them on their way. God said, Shall I hide from Abraham what I'm going to do? Abraham is about to become a great and mighty nation, and through him all the nations of the world will be blessed. I have given him special attention so that he will command his children and his household after him, and they will keep God's way, doing charity and justice. God will then bring about for Abraham everything he promised. God then said, The outcry against Sodom is so great, and their sin is so very grave. I will descend and see. Have they done everything implied by the outcry that is coming before me? If not, I will know. The men turned from where they were and headed towards Sodom. Abraham was still standing before God. He came forward and said, Will you actually wipe out the innocent together with the guilty? Suppose there are 50 innocent people in the city. Would you still destroy it and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 good people inside it? It would be sacrilege even to ascribe such an act to you, to kill the innocent with the guilty, letting the righteous and the wicked fare alike. It would be sacrilege to ascribe to you this to you. Shall the whole world's judge not act justly? God said, If I find 50 innocent people in Sodom, I will spare the entire area for their sake. Abram spoke up and said, I've already said too much before my Lord. I am mere dust and ashes. But suppose there are 5 missing from the 50 innocent. Will you destroy the entire city because of the 5? I will not destroy it if I find 45 there, replied God. Abraham persisted and said, Suppose there are 40 there. I will not act for the sake of the 40. Let not my Lord be angry, but I must speak up. What if there are 30 there? I will not act if I find 30 there. I have already spoken too much now before my Lord. But what if 20 are found there? I will not destroy for the sake of 20. Let my Lord not become angry, but I will speak just once more. Suppose 10 are found there. I will not destroy for the sake of the 10. When he finished speaking with Abraham, God left him. Abraham then returned home. Yes, so Abraham is bargaining with God. That's the end of the chapter. There are 33 verses, quite a long chapter, 33 verses in this chapter. Okay, so now let's take a look at some select Rashis, not all the Rashis, because there are many of them, but we can take a look at a few of them and learn something from them, because it is always very interesting to see how the Rashi commentary adds more dimensions, more information, especially drawing from the oral law, the Torah Sheba'al Peh. Okay, so chapter 18, verse 1. It says, Vayera elav Adonai be'elonei mamre, and he appeared unto him, God. That's if you do a literal translation of the Hebrew, and God appeared unto him. But the first word is really Vayera, and he appeared unto him, God, meaning God appeared unto him, Abraham. So Vayera elav, so he appeared unto him. Why is he appearing unto him? Right? Remember in the previous chapter, chapter 17, we spoke a lot. The chapter is concerned a lot with Abraham's circumcision. So now Abraham is recovering from his circumcision. And this is what Rashi says. God appeared to him. Why? Levaker et hacholeh, to visit the sick. That God himself visited Abraham after his circumcision. And then he quotes here, it's from Talmud Baba Metzia, but it's also in the Midrashim and in Zohar and in other sources. It says, Amma Rabbi Chama Bar Chanina, that's the name of someone in the Talmud, Yom Shlishi Lamilato Haya. It was the third day following Abraham's circumcision. Uva HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and came the Holy One, blessed be He, V'sha'al bishlomo, and he inquired of his welfare. So it shows you God cared. And the third day denotes when it was the most painful. The third day after surgery, supposedly, I mean, this is how it is, the pain is very, very great. So God came to visit Abraham. Bikur Cholim is a great mitzvah. And we see that God himself visited the sick by visiting Abraham on the third day after he had his circumcision. So that's what the appearance is. It's not just, a vision, and sometimes it is. God has a message for Abraham. But in this case, it's also that he's visiting him after he had his circumcision. Elonei Mamre. What's the significance of saying among the trees of Mamre? How does Aryeh Kaplan translate it? In the plains of Mamre. I have here in this Rashi translation, terebinths, whatever terebinths are. And but the question is, why was this particular place chosen for God to visit Abraham? Elonei Mamre. Remember, there were three characters, and Mamre, hu shenatan lo eitza al hamila. Mamre was the one who advised Abraham to go ahead and get himself circumcised. One of Abraham's disciples said Abraham shouldn't circumcise. One said he should circumcise in secret. And one said, go ahead, do it in the open. And that was Mamre. So therefore, God appeared to Abraham in the portion of Mamre. Now, it furthermore says, Vahu Yoshev, and Abraham was sitting. Petach ha'ohel kechom hayom. He's sitting at the entrance of the tent in the heat of the day. So Rashi focuses on this word sitting. Hu Yoshev, Vahu Yoshev. It actually implies, Rashi says, Yashav, he was sitting. Yashav. You read it Yoshev, but it implies Yashav, meaning there's a lesson here. Bikesh la'amod. Actually, Abraham didn't want to sit because God is appearing to him, right? So why is he sitting? Out of honor, he should get up. When a notable personage, or in this case God, appears to you, stand up. You don't sit. So he wanted to get up, but Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but God said to him, Shave, no, sit. Ve'ani e'emod, and I will stand. Ve'ata siman lebanecha, this is a sign for your sons. She'atid ani lehityatzeh ba'adat hadayanim. Ve'hem yoshvim. In a courtroom, when there are judges sitting in judgment, a dayan is a Jewish judge. When they are sitting in judgment, dealing with a case, that God will, so to speak, be standing with them. God joins them, so to speak, standing with them, like standing over them. There's another interpretation I saw, it's not in the Rashi, but similar to this, that when the children of Israel and Jews will be sitting saying the Kriyat Shema, usually in synagogue, or if you're at home, there's the Amidah prayer, there's the prayer where you stand, and there's a prayer where you sit. You sit when you say the Shema Yisrael, because it's like Torah learning. Torah, it's like saying over parts of Torah, so you sit. Like a yeshiva is a place where Torah is learned. So you sit when you say Shema Yisrael. So it says when Jews, the children of Israel, will be sitting, saying the Shema Yisrael, so God will be standing over them, listening to them as well. So there's an additional lesson that he's learned from this. And then it says that he sat, we're still on the first verse, chapter 18, verse 1, that Abraham is sitting petach ha'ohel, at the opening of the door, petach ha'ohel. So why is he sitting at the opening of the door? Why isn't he like sitting on a lounge chair somewhere relaxing? Why is it sitting at the punkt, as they say, exactly at the opening of the tent? So says Rashi, Lirot im yesh aver vashav v'yachnisem beveito. Abraham is famous for hachnasat orchim, the epitome of kindness, of righteousness, of loving kindness, is doing hospitality. Hachnasat orchim. Hachnasat orchim means lahachnis, to enter, to bring in orchim, guests, the bringing in of guests. Hachnasat orchim, literally translated, means the bringing in of guests. That is an act of kindness. You are bringing in, it could be either a friend or a stranger into your home. You feed them, you give them something to drink. In some cases, you allow them to sleep over. Whatever they need, you provide them with, of course, within reason, and as long as it's moral. So this is what Abraham was looking to do, to welcome the guests, the strangers that would pass by. And then through that means, he would start persuading them to believe in God. They would want to thank him, and he would say, no, thank my God. So who's your God? And he would try to explain to them, and they say, no, we don't want to believe in this. And then he would say, well, okay, so then pay me. And he would give them a high price for the hospitality. He said, no, we'd rather thank your God. Okay, and then he would teach them how to say blessings, and that would bring them to a step closer to the recognition of the true God, that there is a true God, and that there is a God in the world. So Petach ha'oil, so that's as far as the opening of the tent. And then it also says, Kechom hayom. It was a broiling hot day, the heat of the day. So what was unusual? I mean, a hot day, okay? But it must have been an unusually hot day, because Rashi says, Hotzi hakadosh baruch hu chama Menartika. Kadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He, God, took out the sun from its container, like the sun is contained, so He made it extra hot. The whatever layers of vapor or whatever it is around the sun, God removed some of that, and the heat came bursting through much stronger than usual. Why? So that guests would stay away. And since he saw that Abraham was literally mitzvah in pain, he was anguished over it. That he didn't have guests coming. So that's the next verse. So then God brought for Abraham the malachim, the angels, bidmut anashim, in the form of people. And Rashi takes it from Baba Metzia, but it's in the Midrashim as well. And so it's brought in a number of sources. Another interpretation I saw is that God let some of the heat from hell come out into the world, and that caused an unnatural heat. And they also say the heat was good for the healing of the wound. Warmth is good for the healing of the wound, and it makes the patient feel more comfortable. You don't want the patient to be freezing either. And okay, so that's verse 1. 1 down, 32 to go. Now, verse 2. Vayisa einav, and he lifted up his eyes. This is talking about Abraham, I guess. Yes, Abraham. Vayisa einav, vayar v'hinei shlosha anashim, and he saw 3. And behold, he saw 3 men. Nitzavim elav, stood over against him, standing by him. Vayar, and he saw them. Vayaretz likratam mipetach ha'oel vayishtachu arza, and he bowed down to the earth. So these words, the way the verse is constructed needs some explanation. So let's see the first part. Rashi says, "V'hinei shlosha anashim," and behold, you have 3 men. Why 3? Why not 1? Okay. So the Rashi explains, "Echad levaseret Sarah." Right? 1, to make an announcement that Sarah is going to have a baby boy who will be called Yitzchak. V'echad la'apoch et Sodom, and another one is coming to overturn Sodom, to punish Sodom, the wicked city. V'echad le'rapot et Avraham, and 1 to cure Abraham. And here is a klal, a principle. She'ein malach echad osa shtei shlichut. No, shlichuyot. She'ein malach echad osa shtei shlichuyot. 1 angel does not do 2 missions. An angel has 1 mission. And they have names. The one who's giving the news about Sarah, that she's going to have a baby boy, I believe that was the angel Michael. That's the name of that angel. And 1 to destroy Sodom, that's Gabriel. It's the name of an angel from the word Gibor. Gibor means strong. And 1 to cure Abraham, that's Raphael. Raphael means to cure, the angel of curing, of medicine, of curing. And he is also the one who will go subsequently, that's Rashi says, Raphael, Sheripa et Abraham, halach misham lahatzil et Lot. So he had a double mission. So you could ask, 1 angel doesn't do 2 missions, so it seems it's all part of the same mission. I can't explain it better than that now. It's a case of saving. You could say, like saving life. So that's all 1 mission. To cure Abraham means to save his life, and to save Lot is to save his life. So it's literally a life-saving mission, a mission of mercy, life-saving mission that included two stops, but it's one mission. Okay, that's the angel Raphael. And they were standing before him. Okay, let's move on, because there's so much to do and so little time to do it in. Verse 3, chapter 18, verse 3. Vayomer Adonai imna matzati chen be'enecha al na ta'avar me'al avdecha. And he said, Abram said, Adonai, my Lord, in the singular, imna matzati chen be'enecha, if I found favor in your sight, again in the singular, al na ta'avar, do not pass by your servant, again in the singular. Vayomer Adonai imna. So who is Abraham referring to if he's talking the singular? There's three of them. So why is he using the singular? So Rashi answers that he's actually talking to the senior one, the one in the middle. That was Michael, the one standing in the middle. Lagadol shebahem amar ukraam kulam adonim. And he implied that they're all his lords. Because when you talk to a senior person, by giving honor to the senior person, you're also implying you're including his companions. And since he would not pass, Rashi says, his friends would also remain with him. So by inviting the senior person, Abraham assumed there was the one in the middle, you're by implication also inviting his companions, because they wouldn't leave without him. And some say he is actually talking to God. This is a reference, Davar Acher Kodesh is a holy reference referring to God. That Abraham is saying to God, that God should wait till he brings in the guests. Because it says God appeared to him. So he's saying to God, like, hang on, wait, don't leave. I have to welcome these guests. Okay, verse number 4, chapter 18. Yukachna ma'at maim. Let some water be taken for you, v'rachasu raglechem, and wash your legs, v'hish'anu tachat ha'etz, and recline, rest under the tree. So the question is, what is the meaning of yukach? Let water be taken? So it implies that Abraham is not taking the water, and that's what Rashi says. Al yedei shaliach, by means of an emissary. V'kadosh baruch hu shilem levanav al yedei shaliach, shenemar vayarem Moshe et yadav vayachet hasala. So it means later, when the children of Israel will want water in the desert, God will not give it to them directly, but through an emissary. It's actually a oblique criticism of Abraham that he didn't do it himself. He did it by means of an emissary. He said, bring them some water. Let water be brought for them. So why didn't he bring the water himself? So since Abraham himself didn't bring the water to the guests, subsequently later, when the children of Israel require water, it's going to be brought to them by an emissary, by Moses, and not by God. Again, remember there's that principle, and I've mentioned it quite a few times, and we're going to be mentioning it a few more times. Maaseh avos siman labanim. Maaseh avot siman labanim. The deeds of the fathers are a sign for the children. What the forefathers did, especially Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, even the smallest acts, the most insignificant acts that they did, had implications because it was, you could say, imprinting the spiritual and physical and the destiny, DNA of the people, of the Jewish people. It implanted a gene, using our language to understand it. It implanted a type of gene inside of the core of the Jewish people, that the way they did it, the way Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob did it, and the way things happened to them would eventually, that's what would be done and would happen to their descendants, the children of Israel, going down through the ages, down to our own times. So again, that principle, Maisa Aves Siman Labanim, and you see it over here. Abraham didn't bring the water directly himself. He had it done by someone else. So then later in the wilderness, when the children of Israel wanted water, it was brought through Moses. God could have given them water himself. So why was it done through Moses? Because this was something that was already, in a sense, I don't want to use the word too recklessly, but predetermined, because Abraham had already done it that way in showing hospitality to his guests. Now, why is he saying to them, "V'rachatzu raglechem," wash your feet? What is that all about? V'rachatzu raglechem. So Rashi says, he thought, kesavur, svara means like logic, thinking, kesavur, shehem arvim, that they were Arabs, a nationality. Shemishtachavim la'avak raglehem, they bow down to the dust of their feet. They have some kind of ritual where they worship the dust on their feet. The hikbid shelo lahachnis avodah zarah lebeito, and he was makbid. Makbid means he was strict about the fact he did not allow any idol worship or remnant of idol worship into his tent. So he had them wash their feet first to purify their feet before they would enter into worship. And it's actually interesting that Muslims wash their feet before they pray. Yes, it's interesting. They wash their hands and their feet. And in the Beit HaMikdash, when there was a Jewish temple, in the first Beit HaMikdash, the second Beit HaMikdash, the first Jewish temple, the second Jewish temple, each temple stood for about 400 years. The Kohanim would wash their feet doing some of the avoda, the divine temple service. But it's interesting that there are still these religious customs that continue down the line of washing feet, purifying your feet. It's an odd thing. Washing hands, we know. And by the way, when we say wash hands, we're not talking about for hygienic reasons. For hygienic reasons, you should wash your hands in any case. You wash them with soap, not on Shabbat. On Shabbat, some people don't use soap, or you use liquid soap, right? Because you're not supposed to rub something. A bar of soap is something solid. You're not supposed to rub it. It's considered one of the activities that are not allowed on Shabbat. But you should keep your hands clean in any case. And then after you've actually hygienically, for cleanliness purposes, cleaned your hands, then you do the ritual washing. It's done either in the morning after you get up, or it's done before you eat bread, or some people do it before they pray. And so that custom is still around. But Abraham did it with these angels because he suspected they were idol worshippers, and that they worshipped somehow some kind of idol worship they had. Avodah zarah means strange worship, worshipping the dust of their feet. So he had them wash their feet first. And then Rashi compares it to Lot, that subsequently when the angels came to visit Lot in Sodom, that's going to be in the next chapter, chapter 19, he was not makbid, and he welcomed the guests before he had them washed. So he was not careful with that. Just trying to point out there's this duality between Abraham and Lot, of how one turned out good and one turned out to be, I won't say bad, but turned out to be less than perfect. Okay, how's that for Lot? He's less than perfect. And then he says, come rest under this tree. Now Rashi says, Tachat ha'ilan, the tree. So what is the tree? So I saw a commentary, maybe it was in the Zohar, that Abraham actually merited to have access to the tree of life. Remember, there were two trees in the Garden of Eden, the Eitz Hada'at Tov Hara, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and the Eitz HaChaim, the tree of life. And the Torah is called the tree of life. So somehow, once he was circumcised, Abraham had access to the tree of life, and he carried it with him wherever it went, and it had like kind of magical qualities, you could say, that he would sit a guest down underneath the tree, and if the tree sort of compacted itself, wrapped itself up, and the branches went up, then he knew this person was an idol worshiper, and he had to work on that person to believe in God. And if he saw that the tree extended its leaves, that the branches extended themselves and the leaves gave shade, then he knew that the guests were righteous people and that they deserved special treatment. So this tree there's more than meets the eye about this tree. Rashi doesn't mention it. It's mentioned in other sources. I just thought I would mention it now because I remembered it. Now it continues. Verse 5, Ve'ekcha pat lechem v'sadu libchem, and I will fetch a morsel of bread, pat lechem. Pat means actually, pat like pita. We'll see, it's going to be called pita here by Rashi. V'sadu libchem, and su'udah means a meal. So fill yourselves, have a meal. Fill your hearts, and then you can pass by. Achar tavoru ki al kein avartem al avdechem. That's why. Look, I mean, this is why you came by here. Vayomru kein taaseh kasher dibat. Okay, so do as you say. So now Rashi says in verse 5, "V'sa'adu libchem," and let's see how Aryeh Kaplan translates it. I'll get a morsel for you to refresh yourselves, and you can rest under the tree. I will get a morsel of bread for you to refresh yourselves. He translates it to refresh yourselves. This translation says, stay your heart. But really the word sa'adu, sa'udah, as I said, means meal. So, it's a good word. Satiate yourselves. That's a good word. That's, if I was translating it, I would say, satiate yourselves, fill yourselves with a meal, with a repast, with good food, and the verse says, "I'll take pat lechem." It's called pat lechem. Lechem is bread, and pat is also. He says it's a morsel. How does Aryeh Kaplan translate it? I will get a morsel, also a morsel. Pat means, but pat also means can mean bread itself. Lechem for sure is bread, but pat is an alternate word that also is used in the sense of bread. Here you have pat lechem, so it's a piece of bread. Have a piece of bread. Maybe the word pat and piece is connected. Who knows? So. And that will satiate you. So there's a connection between the bread and having the meal. So what's the connection between bread and meal? But Torah, so Rashi says, "But Torah, b'nevi'im uvaktuvim matzinu depita sa'adata deliba." In the Torah and in the prophets, those are the writings of the prophets. Like the book of Samuel and Kings. And Ubaktuvim, like the book of Psalms and these other books, Matzini, we find that Pita Sadat Deliba, that's Aramaic. Pita, like we say pita, pita bread, pita. Sephardic Jews eat pita, Arabs eat pita. We all eat pita. You have a falafel in pita, so it's pita. Pei Taf Aleph, Pita. So that's from Pad. Pita Sadata Deliba. Pita, bread, you see here, he translates pita as bread, Rashi, the translation of Rashi. Sadata is this meal of the heart. And then he brings proofs. But Torah Sadu Libchem. So you see over here, the Torah says, the verse says, Sadu Libchem, fill your heart, satiate yourselves. In Tuvim, there's a verse in Nevi'im, there's a verse in Judges. Sa'ad libcha pat lechem, satiate your heart with a loaf of bread. Pat could also mean a loaf. And in Tuvim, in Tehillim, in Psalms, it says, V'lechem levav enosh yis'ad. And bread will the heart of a person fill. Yes, I remember once I was shopping in a store, and one of the store owners said, "Why is it that Jewish people like bread?" You know, so that particular owner was not Jewish. That even non-Jews can identify that Jews like bread. Of course, on Shabbat and on festivals, we use bread for the meal. We make a blessing, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. It's a big deal. And Jews are very much bread eaters. I'm not talking about in modern times people have become salad and sushi eaters. But definitely if you want to have a su'udat mitzvah, you want to have a meal of a mitzvah like here at a wedding or bar mitzvah, so it's called washing. You eat bread. You wash your hands and you eat bread. And in some places, it's a special honor. They give the motzi on the bread to a special person, a rabbi, a grandparent, somebody important is given that honor to make the blessing over the bread, over the challah, whatever it is that they're eating. So that's because bread satiates the heart. A real meal is not a meal unless it has bread, as far as the Torah is concerned. Bread is what makes or breaks a meal. If you have bread, in fact, you can live on bread. You don't need much more than bread. Bread has in it oil. Oftentimes it has in it eggs. It can have salt. It has the wheat itself is very nutritious, especially if it's not so refined. It has a lot of nutrients. So bread and water, you can live a long time on bread and water, right? We all know that. And then Rashi mentions a little point here from Bereshis Rabbah. Why does it say libchem and not lavavchem, your hearts? And it says instead, your heart. They all had one heart, libchem. So he says over here, there's a comment that he realized that these were angels. She'ein yetzara shaled b'malachim. The evil inclination does not rule over angels. Maybe also implying because we say in the Shema prayer, it says in the Torah, "V'lo tatur acharei nechem acharei levavchem v'acharei nechem." You shouldn't go after your heart. So it uses a plural language. You shouldn't go after your hearts. So it implies a good impulse, and you have a good part of your heart and a bad part of your heart. You have a good impulse and a bad impulse. So here he's using the word only one heart, meaning angels don't have a bad impulse. They only have a good heart, no bad heart, only a good heart. So that's another implication. Let's go a little further. Chapter 18, verse 7 now. The El Habakar Ratz Abraham, and to the herd ran Abraham, Vayikach ben Bakar, and he took ben Bakar, a calf, Rach Vatov, tender and good, Vayiten El Hana'ar, and he gave it to the lad, the boy. Vayimaher la'asot otani, hurry to do it. So what's going on here? Ben Bakar Rachvatov. Ben Bakar Rachvatov. So Rashi says it was actually, and this is not just Rashi, this is in the Baba Metzia, in the Talmud, it's in the Midrashim. Gimel Parim Hayud. No, there were three. He took three. Excuse me. He took three calves, not one. Why? In order to feed them three tongues. He wanted to give each guest a tongue. The tongue is considered to be the most delectable part of the animal. It's the softest meat. It's like, as they say, they use the expression soft as butter. It's not butter, but it's very, very soft. It's very, very tasty. It's a rich food. So he wanted to give each of the three guests a tongue, bechardal, with mustard. Wow, sophisticated. He wanted to give them each of the three guests one tongue. And it says, he said to the lad, to the boy, go quick. Who is that? El Hana'ar. So Rashi says, and this is from the Bereshis Rabbah and other Midrashim, Ze Yishmael. This is actually Yishmael. Yishmael is over there, part of the scene. Why? Lechancha b'mitzvot. To educate him in doing commandments of Hachnasat Orchim, welcoming guests. And this is true, by the way. The descendants of Yishmael, the Islamic people, are very hospitable. If you've been to Israel, or if you know about the culture of the Arabs, like they have a tent and they make a meal, and then everyone is welcome to come and eat. They're very welcoming in that way. That's when they're not on the warpath. When they're on the warpath, they're not welcoming. But when they are peaceful and they are open to socializing, they're very welcoming of strangers, and they welcome people to join them in their meals. So this is coming from Abraham, who educated his son Yishmael to be a good host in Hachnasat Orchim. So now it says in verse 8 that Vayikach chem'a v'chalav. He took butter v'chalav. Chem'ar literally is butter and chalav is milk. What did Arya Kaplan said? He said cottage cheese. So the question is, he took curd, he took chema, he took butter, okay? What happened? V'lechem lo hevi. After saying that, I will get bread for you, for the guests, no bread. The first thing he gets is butter and milk. What happened to the bread? Right? Good question. Since we spent so much time focusing on the bread, what happened to the bread? So Rashi says, and this is from Midrashim, it's also brought down in the Talmud, he didn't bring bread. Why? Because when Sarah was making the dough to make fresh bread, like pita bread, Lefisha Persa Sarah Nida. Sarah became a Nida. A Nida means a woman who's menstruating. She suddenly started to menstruate. Shechazar la orach kanashim, also hayom, because the way of women, menstruation, she got her period. In her old age, she got her period again. Then it made her isa, and the dough became unclean. So she had her fingers in the dough, and then the minute she got her period, she withdrew her fingers from the dough. And but that already made the dough tameh. Because a woman who has her period is considered to be tameh. Tameh means impure. It doesn't mean unclean. It's a spiritual state of impurity. During that time, a husband and wife, according to the Torah, are not allowed to live together, not allowed to have sexual relations. You wait for the period to be over. And then you wait another week after the period is over, and then she checks herself, and then she goes to the mikveh, and then they can have relations again. So she became tameh as she was making the dough, and so the dough became tameh as well, and they couldn't serve it. You see that they had a very high. Does this apply today as a practical law? I would say probably not. I don't think so. I don't know of anyone who won't eat the challah of their wife because she made the challah when she was a nida. But in this case, that's what happened. So that's why they couldn't serve the bread. And then he served them, it says, Vayiten lifnehem, this is in verse 8, the middle. He gave them, V'hu amed alehem tachat ha'etz vayachelu. And he stood over them, and they ate. So Rashi says, Kama. They ate it in order, meaning they first ate the milchik, because it says, Vayikach chema v'chalav v'ven habakar asher asa. He took the butter and the milk, and then the meat of the calf and the calf itself, the meat, meaning the tongues. So Rashi says how they ate it together. According to Rashi, they ate it in order because you're not supposed to eat meat and milk together. That's going to be a commandment in the Torah. It hasn't been given yet. It's going to be given later to the children of Israel when they receive the Torah. So Rashi says they ate it in order. You are allowed to eat dairy first, milk first, and then you wash out your mouth and you can eat meat. But if you eat meat first, you cannot then eat dairy. You have to wait a certain amount of hours. Different communities have different customs. The Ashkenazi custom is to wait 6 hours after you eat meat, so then you can eat milk. But certainly you're not allowed to eat meat and milk together. That's called treif. Treif means unfit. So some of the other commentaries actually say that they did eat it together because the laws of kashrut did not apply yet. So they ate meat and milk together, and like they had, people eat cheeseburgers. So they had a dairy and tongue together, according to some commentaries. And then later it's held as a complaint against them down the line, against the angels in a different context. Let's move on. And then they announced the birth of Yitzchak. Sarah laughs. Then they question why Sarah laughed. I want to move on because time is moving along. I want to move on now in verse 20. In verse 20, chapter 18, verse 20, God says to Abraham, Vayomer Adonai za'akat stam va'amara ki rabba v'chatatam ki chavda ma'od. And the Lord said, Za'akat stam v'amara, the cry of Sodom and Amorah is great, and the sin is very, very heavy. So So it says in verse 20, Vayomer Adonai. So Rashi says, who is God directing this comment at? When it says God, and God said to who? So Rashi says, said to Abraham, El Avraham, She'asa kasher amar, shelo yechas mimeno, because he had done God's will. It's one interpretation. Shelo yechas mimeno. He didn't want to hide it from him because he considered to be Abraham his confidant. So he took Abraham into his confidence, literally. And it's a kind of teaching you a kind of morality that even God, who doesn't really need to consult with anyone and doesn't need to bring anybody into his confidence and can act independently as he surely does, but he took Abraham into his confidence because he felt, how can I not let Abraham know, because something is going to happen in Abraham's territory There's also Lot, Abraham's nephew, who's living among the Sodomites. So God felt it necessary to bring Abraham into the loop, into the picture. And then God says, Erdana ve'ereh haketzakat haba'a elai asu kala ve'im lo eida'ah. I will go down now and see whether, according to the cry which has come to me, they've actually done. I want to see, because I've heard a cry. Now let me see if they've actually done what looks like they're up to here. Destruction shall come upon them, and if not, I will know. So what is this verse talking about? First of all, it says, chapter 18, verse 21, Erda na. Let me go down. So what's this going down? Again, we had it in the Tower of Babel. Before God punished them, he says, let me go down and see. To teach you that you should examine, a judge should examine the case himself properly. He should examine the details of the case before he executes judgment. So there's a similar thing over here. Erdana, I will go down. Limad ledayanim. It's a lesson, or he's teaching judges. Shelo yifseku dinei nefashot ele b're'iyah, that they shouldn't judge capital cases unless they've actually seen the evidence. They've actually seen the evidence. Not circumstantial evidence. It has to be actual evidence. And it's Hakol Kamasha Parashti B'Parshas Haflag. And it's, as I've explained, Rashi says in the story of the Tower of Babel. It's called Dar Haflaga. Remember, there's Dar HaMabel, generation of the flood, and then there's Dar Haflaga, the generation of the dispersion that follows the building of the Tower of Babel that God destroyed it. So God came down to check out what's happening over there. And then another interpretation, Davar Acher Erdana, let me go down, Lesaf Masehem. Let me go down to the depths of their acts. Let me really try to analyze the motivations. That's a good word. The motivations of what is going on here, why they are acting so wickedly. And another interpretation is God is going down from one level to another. He's going from the level of mercy down to the level of judgment. Not necessarily in that one is lower than the other, but he's sort of divesting himself of mercy and patience, and now he's going down to the status of a judge who's going to execute judgment and punishment on them. So Abraham goes into his famous debate of maybe there'll be 50 righteous men. Now there's going to be 5 cities over here that are involved. Sodom is the most important one, Rashi says. So that's why it gets mentioned almost exclusively, because it's like it was the main metropolis around which the 4 other cities were built. And the reason for 50 was Abraham wanted to say, let's see if we can find 10 righteous people from among the 10 each from each city. And then he went down to 45 and 40, if only 10 from 4 cities, 3 cities, 30 from 3 cities, and so on. That's and Rashi does the math. And that's what he says here in verse 24. Ulai yesh chamishim tzadikim b'toch ha'ir. Maybe there are 50 righteous people in the city. So it says, Asarat tzadikim lekol krach v'krach. Ki he mekamot yesh. Because there's 5 places, there's 5 cities. Let's see if we can find 10 righteous people in each city. and maybe they can be spared. And I do want to just focus on this verse. Yes, it's coming up. Famous verse that says in verse 25, at the end of the verse, it says, Hashafet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat, will the judge of the earth not do justly? That's a famous Hebrew expression taken from the Torah, this verse, part of this verse. Hashafet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat, will the judge of the earth not be a good judge? Will he not act justly? And Rashi says, Lashon Tamiyah, say it as a question. V'chi mi shehu shafet lo yaseh mishpat emet? And will the one who's a judge not do true justice? And it goes down to 10, but they couldn't even find 10. And the reason that Abraham, the commentaries say that Abraham didn't bargain past 10 was he saw that in the time of Noah, there were not 10 righteous people, because there was Noah and his wife and his 3 sons and their wives. So they didn't amount to 10 people, and the Shekhinah, you could say, and even God's presence. So that's still 9, because there were 4 couples. Noah, his 3 sons, each had a spouse, so that's 8. And then you add God's presence, because that's also considered one of the things that can be added. So 9 is not enough. So the mere fact that there were 9 souls, including women, you see, women counted as being a righteous person. And they couldn't find any women, even men or women, and even including the presence of God. So if you don't hit the magical number of 10, it doesn't help. The required quorum is not there. And you see, when Jews come together to pray, you need a minyan. A minyan is 10. We actually learn it from the 10 spies. That an Ada, a congregation, is called 10 because they're called Adat Reshaim. Actually, they're called a community of 10. Okay, so we've seen the Rashi. Let's take a look at this a little bit. Tzena Urena. These are midrashic teachings. Also, there's a lot here, so I just have to, pluck a few things, and then we'll move to the next thing. Fruit of an old tree. Here's something I like. Be'elonei Mamre, in the plains of Mamre. Mamre was Abraham's ally, who had encouraged him to carry out the command of circumcision. Because of this, God appeared to Abraham in his city. To the prophets, God appeared from within fire, water, or wind, or on the ground, as we see in many writings. But in Abraham's case, he appeared within a tree. And remember, I mentioned to you that Abraham, this tree, was connected somehow to the tree of life mentioned in Genesis at the beginning. As we learn from the words of Elonei Mamre, the plains of Mamre, which can also be read as meaning the trees of Mamre. God wanted to intimate to Abraham that just as an old tree still bears fruit, so would Abraham have children in his old age. Why would one angel not do all 3 tasks? Because one angel cannot do both good and bad. One angel is sent on a mission of kindness and mercy, while another brings strict justice. But in this case, why was it that Michael, who had been sent to tell Sarah the good news, could not also heal Abraham? Raphael is appointed over all matters of healing, and no other angel can assume his responsibility. And after healing Abraham, he proceeded there to save Lot. Seeing that the angels were standing still, he understood that they hesitated to trouble him, so he ran towards them and invited them in. And then he talks about hospitality. Yes, all guests are equal. Listen to this. Prepare quickly 3 measures of fine meal. Why did he ask for 3 measures of meal? Why did Abraham ask his wife to prepare 3, right? 3 measures, so that he could give each one an equal amount, and there should be no envy during the meal. Ramban, that's Nachmanides, one of the commentators, adds that he asked her to sieve it carefully so that it would be utterly clean. Also, there shouldn't be favoritism amongst guests. Okay, Rabbi Bechaya writes, why did Avram not bring bread to the meal? Sarah was kneading the dough when she suddenly began to menstruate. She took her hands out of the dough and it became chametz. For water and flour which is left unhandled for a certain period of time becomes chametz leaven, and it is forbidden for use on Pesach. And this was the day before Pesach. So this is another interpretation. I was talking about the Tumah of Nida, but this is talking about the chametz of Pesach, that the angels were coming. Erev Pesach, it was close to Pesach, and she became Nida, and she somehow, the water got mixed with she was kneading the dough, and the water got mixed with the flour for too long a time. It has to be, the whole process has to be done within 18 minutes. That was very quickly. So if water is left with flour for any length of time, let's say she started menstruating, so she had to go clean herself up, and then she neglected the dough, so then the dough became chametz. So they were not able to give the guests the dough and the bread, which was actually chametz. So that's another interpretation. Okay. The evil, God said, the cry of Sodom and Amorah is great. They were evil both in body and with their possessions, but their judgment in heaven was mainly because of their refusal to give charity. Refusal to give charity. We say on Rosh Hashanah, and it's a principle, tzedakah tatil mimaves, charity will save you from death, and tshuva tefillah tzedakah ma'avir nedra gezerah, tshuva, repentance, tefillah, prayer, tzedakah, giving charity, remove the evil decree. So giving charity is considered to be something of very, very, very important in Judaism and in the Torah and in all society. I mean, today, for example, in the United States, we know that philanthropy is rewarded. People's generosity, they support university and churches and synagogues and yeshivas and non-profit organizations and non-governmental organizations are all supported through charitable givings. And also the government gives you a tax deduction in America for giving charity, tax deductible deduction, a tax deductible donation. That where does that value come from? Not from Sodom. In some societies and some people consider giving their money, it's my money, why should I give it away? So that's Sodomite thinking. The Jewish way of thinking, the Torah way of thinking, you could say the Judeo-Christian way of thinking, tithing, giving a tenth of your income, of your produce to charity, to the Levites, to the Kohanim, giving to the poor. These are different forms of charity. Leaving the corners of your field, leaving the things that have dropped from your harvest for the poor, giving money, feeding, clothing, a place to rest for the poor, for the homeless. These are all great values in Judaism. And you can see it's part of chesed. Tshuva, tefillah, tzedakah. So the Sodomites this was their downfall. They were the opposite of that. Okay, so that's that commentary. Let's take a look at Midrash Rabbah, right? Just a couple of points. Okay. Coming back to the subject of Abraham's circumcision, which we saw in chapter 17. So there's a note here, goes into some detail. Circumcision, which God did not reveal to Abraham. It took 20 generations for Abraham to come along, from Adam to Noah, from Noah to Abraham, until he revealed circumcision, and then he made a covenant with Abraham based on that circumcision. Remember, covenant is a deal between me and between God and Abraham. So it was in the nature of a secret which remains between two. And God said to him, if you will circumcise yourself, he said to Abraham, you will receive the secret, the sod of God. What is the secret of God? And so he says, Samach stands for 60, right? Sod. So you have Samach, Vav, Daled. Samach in secret in Hebrew is Sod. Sod, S-O-D, Samach, Vav, Daled. So Samach is 60, Vav is 6, and Daled is 4, right? So that makes 70. So this is what God is saying to Abraham, that I will reveal my secrets to you. What is the secret? I will cause 70 people to spring from you, meaning there'll be 70 souls. Eventually, one of the levels of the Jewish people, of the children of Israel, from going the 3 forefathers, the 12 tribes, and then there's 70 souls. So 70 souls will come from you. And then after that, will be set up 70 elders. Shivim Skenim, there'll be 70 elders who already in the wilderness advised Moshe and the beginning of a Sanhedrin, a Jewish Supreme Court. And then Moses will study the Torah in 70 languages. There's Shivim Lashonos, there's Shivim Umos. The Torah considers there to be 70 languages. For the merit of, this is all for the merit of circumcision, and because it says the secret of the Lord is with him that fear him. Sod Hashem li yireyav. It's a verse that says the secret of the Lord is to those who fear him and his covenant. So because Abraham entered into the covenant, he merited to know the secret of the Lord. And what was that? He would have 70 descendants come from him, meaning the 70 souls that would go down to Egypt. That was a stage in the formation of the children of Israel and the Jewish people. There would be 70 sages, Shivim Zakanim. Moses would understand the Torah in 70 languages because there's 70 nations. So this is what God is making Abraham aware of through circumcision. Also, the Torah is called a covenant. So all the words, Shabbat is called a covenant. So wherever it says the word covenant, they're all connected. One enlightens and one sheds light on the other. And one more point. Yeah, it says, and the Lord went his way as soon as he had left off speaking to Avram. That is in the last verse, chapter 18, verse 33. So Medrash Rabbi says, and it's actually also in the Rashi. So we're seeing it now. Well, Rashi, we left off the Rashi, but we're seeing it in the Medrash. A judge waits as long as the advocate is pleading. So as long as Abraham was pleading, so the judge waited. When the advocate becomes silent, when Abraham remained silent, the judge rises to go. Similarly, and the Lord went his way as soon as he had left off speaking to Abraham. Again, a different way of looking at it. An advocate goes on pleading as long as the judge is willing to pay attention to him. The advocate will plead as long as the judge is willing to pay attention. But when the judge rises to go, the advocate becomes silent. When the judge leaves, gets up from his chair and leaves, there is no point in continuing pleading before the judge. So that's another thing that happened. You can look at it both ways. One, when the advocate, Abraham, stopped saying anything, God left. Or vice versa. Once God left, Abraham stopped pleading. So there's an ambiguity in the verse that the Medrash is bringing out. And then finally, as long as the defender pleads and the judge shows himself willing to hear, the accuser waits. Now we talk about an accuser. As long as the defender pleads and the judge shows himself willing to hear, the accuser waits. When the judge rises and the advocate is silent, when the judge rises, the advocate is silent, the accuser sets forth on his mission. And then that's why it says, the two angels then went to Sodom to carry out their judgment. And let's see if I can extract anything from the Zohar commentary. See, Zohar Volume 1. I have the set. You can buy it online. It's Sansino. It's very, very interesting. It's the only known English translation of the Zohar, and it's very valuable. It's important because Zohar is written in Aramaic, and it's very difficult to understand. Of course, there's a lot of esoteric knowledge, but there's a lot of general points you can get out of it. It's based on the Chumash. So as you see, it's based on verses in the Torah, and you can learn a lot from it. Okay, let's take a look again at Abraham and the angels. Says the Zohar, when Abraham was still suffering from the effects of the circumcision, the Holy One, that means God, sent him 3 angels, visible. In other words, he sent him 3 visible angels to inquire of his well-being. You may perhaps wonder how angels can ever be visible, right? This is what we discussed at the beginning of this video. Angels are invisible. So how can they be visible? Since it's written, who makes his angels spirits? They're spirits. They're not visible. They're spirits. Abraham, however, assuredly did see them as they descended to earth in the form of men. And indeed, whenever the celestial spirits descend to earth, they clothe themselves in corporeal elements and appear to men in human shape. Now Abraham, although he was in great pain from his wound, ran forward to meet them so as not to be remiss in his hospitality. Reb Shimon says, assuredly he saw them in their angelic form, since it is written, and he said, Adonai, my Lord, which shows that the Shekhinah, an appellative which is Adonai, has come with them. So Abraham saw the Shekhinah, God's divine presence. So he ran towards them, and that the angels accompanied her as her throne and pillars. The angels were like the throne and pillars of the Shekhinah, of the divine presence, because they are the three colors below her. And Abraham, whatever those three colors are, I don't know. And Abraham, now that he was circumcised, saw what he could not see before. At first he took them for men, but afterwards he became aware that they were holy angels who had been sent on a mission to him. Okay, so that's some information about the angels. Let me look a little further. Okay, and then they said, a year from now, Sarah, your wife, shall have a son. So why didn't they say, question, why not us the Zohar? Why not, and you shall have a son? Why does it have to say Sarah will have a son? Right? See if you can figure it out. In order that Abraham should not think that possibly he should be from Hagar. That's the problem, because Abraham had two wives. So maybe when they're coming to announce a son, and he already had a son with Hagar, that was Yishmael, and now the angels are announcing you're going to have a new son, so maybe it's going to be from Hagar. No. So in order that him should not think that possibly he should be from Hagar, like the previous one. And Reb Shimon here discoursed on the text, a son honoreth his father and a servant his master. He said, a conspicuous example of a son honoring his father is presented by Isaac at the time when Abraham bound him on the altar with the intent of offering up as a sacrifice. Now the Zohar is already describing what type of son Abraham is going to have, Isaac. Talking about the Akedah, we'll see this coming up soon in upcoming chapters. The binding of Isaac, Akedas Yitzchak, where God commands Abraham to take Isaac and offer him up as a sacrifice. That's the kind of son Abraham will have. So when that happened, when God commanded Abraham to offer up Isaac, he was then 37 years old. So he wasn't a baby. People think that Isaac was a little kid. No, he was 37 years old, whilst his father was an old man. And although Isaac could easily, by a single kick, have liberated himself, instead he let himself be bound like a lamb in order to do the will of his father. So this is going on a verse in Malachi, chapter 1, verse 6. A son honors his father, and a servant his master. A servant's honoring his master is illustrated by Eliezer's conduct on the occasion when he was sent by Abraham to Haran. Now the Zohar is jumping the gun and talking about the time when Abraham sent his servant Eliezer to find a wife for Yitzchak, for his son Isaac. He then followed out all the wishes of his master and paid him great respect, as it is written. And he said, I am Abraham's servant. And the Lord blessed my master Abraham. This is in Genesis 24. Here was a man who had with him, this is Eliezer, had with him silver and gold and precious stones and camels, and was himself a great presence. Yet he did not present himself as a friend of Abraham or one of his relatives, but openly declared, I am the servant of Abraham, in order to extol his master and make him an object of honor in the eyes of his bearers. Hence the prophet exclaims, this is Malachi, a son honors his father, and a servant his master, as much as to say, you Yisrael, my children, you feel ashamed to declare that I'm your father or that you're my servants? So don't be ashamed. Hence the verse proceeds, if then I'm the father, if then I be a father, where is my honor? So when it says of Isaac and lo, a son, it means truly a son proper, not an Ishmael, but a son who will pay due respect and honor to his father. Right? He will even go so far as to offer himself up, his life, to honor his father. If this is what his father wants, this is what his father was commanded to do, to offer him up as a sacrifice by God, so he submitted himself willingly. And further it said, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son, because Isaac was indeed a son to Sarah, since it was in his account that she died. Yes, there's a famous midrash that says when Abraham took Isaac to the Akedah to offer him up as a sacrifice, a bad angel, the Malach HaMaves, came to Sarah and told her, or the Satan, which is also an evil angel, told her that where they've gone to offer up Isaac as a sacrifice. So she died as a result of hearing this, of what had happened. On his account, she suffered anguish of soul until her life departed. And further, on his account, on Isaac's account, she is exalted at the time when the Holy One sits in judgment on the world. That's on Rosh Hashanah. We read this portion of the Torah. On Rosh Hashanah, we read about the Akedah. We read about the announcement of Yitzchak's birth and of the Akedah. That's read. That's the Torah portion that's read on Rosh Hashanah. For on that day, the Israelites read the portion that's Jews, and the Lord remembered Sarah, and as he said, mentioning Sarah for the sake of Isaac, a son of Sarah. Okay, so that's about that. Let's see if I have anything else. Okay, says the Zohar, observe how the great love of the Almighty towards Abraham was manifested in the fact that Isaac was not born to him until he was circumcised. In this way, it was made certain that his seed should be holy, according to the words of the scripture, wherein is the seed thereof after its kind. The fruit is like the seed. So the seed here is the seed that comes from the male organ, and an uncircumcised male produces an imperfect fruit. It's an imperfect seed, so it produces an imperfect fruit. Whereas a circumcised Jewish male produces a perfect seed that will produce a perfect fruit. For had Abraham begotten before he was circumcised, his seed would not have been holy, as it would have been the state of Arla. Arla means literally foreskin, uncircumcised. And thus would have, and it's also forbidden. The first 3 years of a fruit tree are forbidden. It's called Arla, forbidden to be eaten. And thus would have clung to that state here below. So it would have been an impure condition that would have been imposed on Isaac. Had Abraham not been circumcised, it would have been an Arla, impure state that would have been imposed on Isaac and on the Jews subsequently after that. But after Abraham's circumcision, the seed issued from the state of holiness by being circumcised. When a Jewish man gives of his seed to his wife, we're talking about in a normal matrimonial relationship, and became attached to supernal holiness, and he begat children in the higher plane, and thus became attached to his grade in the manner fitting. Then it goes into the meaning of the name Yitzchak, that the Zohar points out that it's a name that was predestined by God and not given to the parents to decide. And one final point, the Zohar says, having related how Abraham was informed of the coming birth of Isaac, the Torah proceeds, and the men rose up from there and looked out towards Sodom. Right? This is the angels now, after they finished with the meeting with Abraham and Sarah and telling them that the Yitzchak will be born, going through the hospitality. Now they rise and they headed to Sodom and looked out towards Sodom. So reports the Zohar, said Rabbi Elazar, observe how merciful the Holy One, that's God, blessed be He, shows Himself towards all beings, and especially towards those who walk in His paths. For when He is about to execute judgment on the world, before doing so, He puts in the way of His beloved the occasion of performing a good act. That is, before God sent the angels to destroy Sodom, He gave Abraham an opportunity to do a good act. We have thus been taught that when the Holy One loves a man, He sends him a present in the shape of a poor man, so that he should perform some good deed to him, through the merit of which he shall draw to himself a cord of grace from the right side, which shall wind around his head and imprint a mark on him, so that when punishments fall on the world, the destroyer, raising his eyes and noticing the mark, will be careful to avoid him and leave him alone. Right? So it's actually doing you a favor when some poor person comes to you and you act charitably with them. There's like it's the opposite of the mark of Cain. The grace of God is wound around you, and it's a sign for any subsequent destroying angel. It's like a kind of, you're getting your own private mezuzah, your own private protection. So when the Holy One was about to execute judgment on Sodom, He first led Abraham to do a meritorious action by the present which He sent him. That means the three angels. So as thereby to save Lot, his brother's son, from destruction. Aha. So this is already stretching into the next chapter of, in the merit of Abraham doing a good deed with the angels, it's going to help to save Abraham's nephew Lot from destruction. It is therefore written, and God remembered Abraham and set Lot out of the midst of the overthrow. That's going to say in Genesis 19. That's the next chapter. That God remembered Lot in the merit of Abraham. Or he rescued Lot from his situation because God remembered Abraham. It does not say that God remembered Lot, since he was saved through the merit of Abraham. What God remembered was the kindness which Abraham had shown to those three angels. Similarly, the charitable deeds which a man, now a general teaching, similarly, the charitable deeds which a man performs are remembered by the Holy One at the time when punishment impends upon the world. For every meritorious action is recorded on high, and when chastisement impends over the man, the Holy One remembers the kindness he had performed with other men, as we read, by charity delivered from death. That's from Proverbs, Mishlei. The Holy One thus afforded Abraham in advance the occasion of a good action, so that by his merit he should deliver Lot from destruction. And they looked out towards Sodom. This was immediate after the men rose up from there, that is, from the feast that Abraham had prepared for them, so performing a meritorious act. For although they were angels, his hospitality to them was a good action, since of the whole of the food offered them they left nothing over, purposely, that Abraham should acquire merit thereby, as it is written, and they did eat, the food having been consumed by their fire, angelic fire. It may be objected that the three angels were one of fire, one of water, and the third of air. You know, they were made of different elements. The answer to this, however, is that they all partook of each other's essences, and hence they did eat. So they intermingled their essences. Analogous to this is the passage, and they beheld God and did eat and drink. That's in Exodus. There it was truly eating. for they feasted themselves on the Shekhinah. So here, and they did eat, implies that they feasted themselves on that side to which Abraham was attached, and for that reason nothing remained of what Abraham put before them. For just as it behooves a man to partake of the cup of blessing after a meal, that he merit the blessing from on high, so the angel who ate from Abraham prepared for them that they might be privileged to feast on that which proceeds from the side of Abraham, for it is from that side that sustenance issues for all the celestial angels. Yeah, so they themselves, the angels themselves, got a sustenance from Abraham. Okay, so I thank you for your kindness and watching and listening, and we'll be back. Hang in there and stay safe and healthy. And if you need to reach me, my email is rudomin@jpi.org and rudomin@att.net. Thank you so much.